Hi, I'm Lauren LeBlanc. I'm a book critic and a board member of the National Book Critics Circle. I'm pleased to welcome you today to the 2023 Brooklyn Book Festival's virtual festival for a conversation with Kate Briggs, Guadalupe Nettel, and Susie Boyt. If you're in New York City next week, the in-person festival takes place on October 1st in downtown Brooklyn. Before we begin, I want to let you know that books by the authors in this program can be purchased in the link below. And I'm going to offer introductions right now, beginning with Kate Briggs. She grew up in Somerset, United Kingdom, and lives and works in Rotterdam, Netherlands, where she founded and co-runs the writing and publishing project Short Pieces That Move. She is the translator of 2 volumes of Roland Barthes' lecture and seminar notes at the Collège de France, The Preparation of the Novel and How to Live Together, both published by Columbia University Press. The long form follows This Little Art, a narrative essay on the practice of translation. In 2021, Kate Briggs was awarded a Wyndham Campbell Prize. Guadalupe Nettel is the author of 4 international award-winning novels. Apologies, my Spanish is non-existent. El Huésped, The Body Where I Was Born, After the Winter, and Stillborn, as well as 3 collections of short stories. Her work has been translated into more than 10 languages and has appeared in publications such as the New York Times, Granta, The White Review, and many others. She currently lives in Mexico City, where she is the director of the magazine Revisita de la Universidad de Mexico. Susie Boyt is the author of 7 novels and the memoir My Judy Garland Life, which was shortlisted for the PEN/Ackerley Prize, staged at the Nottingham Playhouse, and serialized on BBC Radio 4. She has written about art, life, and fashion for the Financial Times for many years, and recently edited The Turn of the Screw and Other Ghost Stories by Henry James. She's also director at the Hampstead Theatre. She lives in London with her family. Thank you all for being here today. I'd like to start by asking if you could each talk a little bit about your book, and from there we could talk about the inspiration. This panel is titled Baby Dearest, but the through line that I see for all of these is a question about how does motherhood change lives? How does it change narratives? How does it change our perspective on the world and the way we engage with it? And how is it kind of a force for challenge within kind of interpersonal relationships? And how does it push us to see the world and time and space differently? So to start off, Susie, if you could tell us about your book, could you begin?
Okay. Loved and Missed is a sort of short and sharp book about a youngish grandmother in her 50s who recognizes that her daughter isn't really capable of raising her daughter's baby, and pretty well makes off with the baby herself. And the book then describes the next 15 years as these 3 generations of females sort of interact, sometimes painfully, sometimes joyfully. And so I suppose there's a strong theme of second chances, that the main character, Ruth, feels she's done a dreadful job with her daughter, and raising her granddaughter, Lily, is a chance to sort of get things right a second time, that this time she'll get the love right. And similarly, her daughter feels that she's let her mother down. And so letting her raise her baby is also a sort of tremendous gift. So it's a kind of transactional thing. The mother's both saving the daughter's baby and being saved by the baby, because she's very, very lonely in her life, which you only realize gradually. So the baby is a thing of sort of tremendous value in my book, more than it is a burden. And it was important to me to write a baby that was a really fully fledged character, that obviously all the babies that we know, some of them are full of promise and some of them are a bit boring, like people of all ages. And I wanted to make a baby that was really magnificent, as they can sometimes be, and how, without being soppy, that the childlike wonder that a baby has, when you catch a bit of it as an adult, can sort of change everything. You might then feel fully filled with cynicism 2 minutes later, but in that minute where you join that sort of wonder, just at the look of a cotton reel or a bumblebee or something not very exciting, sort of, so that a bit of that wonder can spill spill into the lives of people who are really struggling.
I feel that so much. That's such a part of your book, and I love the way that it also brings in so much about friendship and kind of the larger world of people who help raise a child as well, and help the parents along the way too. You know, specifically the mothers in your book. But
You can't really write about family now without acknowledging that there are so many different ways of being a family, so many good ways and strange ways and terrible ways and wonderful ways.
I also love the fact that, as you mentioned, like the way that kind of the joy that a baby can inspire can spill over into others' lives and allow them these opportunities for second chances. I feel like in some ways the discourse right now is trying to create a space for women to be able to talk about the challenges of motherhood, but we can't lose sight of the other element of it, which is that it does have this amazing capacity to bring joy and kind of a possibility into life as well.
This sort of crystallized with me not long ago when I went to a book prize, and the book that won the prize was about a real life mother who'd killed her children. And in awarding the prize, the prize giver said, "Of course, we all want to do that sometimes." And I just sort of thought, no, maybe we don't all want to do that, or it just this sort of normalization of, sure, it can be impossibly difficult at times, but it just seemed that it had gone too far the other way.
Yeah, this is something I would love to explore with all of you. I definitely feel that that's kind of an element that's bubbling up right now, and I'd like to see it discussed and sort of analyzed in a way that can bring that to explain why that's happening as well. Like, why do people feel the need to do that? And I understand that we have such a mythology around parenthood, but at the same time, it doesn't need to go in that direction, maybe. And maybe that corrective is not the best path. But anyway, I think the next, maybe Guadalupe, if you could talk about your novel. I think that because this is a great segue, talking about friendship and also kind of the ways that people perceive of parenthood as well. So,
okay. Stillborn is a book about, I started to write it because I was very inspired and very touched by the story of a very close friend of mine, Amelia, to whom the book is dedicated. And she had a terrible pregnancy. She first had a lot of struggle to get pregnant, and then when she was 8 months pregnant, the doctor said to her, "Your baby is going to die the day she will be born." So she started like a mourning process, and then everything changed the day she was prepared finally to say goodbye to her daughter and to her dream about motherhood, and to hold her in her arms the day she would be born. And the day she was born, the doctor said, "Okay, she's not going to die right now. She could die tomorrow, or maybe in 1 month, or maybe in some years, but she's not going to die immediately. But the certain fact is that she will die very soon. And she has a terrible condition in her brain because her brain didn't develop." So the novel is told from the perspective of the friend, of a friend of her. The narrator is called Laura. She's not me. And it's a fiction story. It's a novel. I mean, it's not exactly the chronicle of what happened to her or anything. But yeah, friendship is a very, very important element in this story. And also, I was very touched by the way my friend could handle this situation and transform a catastrophe, a huge tragedy in her life, into something very, very meaningful and beautiful too. So that's what I try to express in this book.
It's such a moving book, and I think the tension between the two women, another element that I saw that starts, the book begins with, is this idea of two women who are incredibly ambitious, incredibly intellectual, bisexual who wonder whether or not there's space in their life to have a child, and these two women go in different directions, and yet they both find themselves caretaking in very different ways, and also maintaining a relationship with one another despite those challenges. So I really admired that element of the book as well. And I feel like I've very rarely seen that kind of difficulty about pregnancy and childbirth portrayed in fiction. And I really admired that about your book as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Kate, could you speak with us about your book?
Yeah, of course. So my book is called The Long Form. And the long form describes, on the one hand, the kind of form of relation that happens in the novel, which is between a young mother called Helen and her baby. And it also describes the form of the novel itself as being the kind of one of the longest aesthetic forms we have, one of the longer experiences that we make for each other when we make art. And so I guess the question, which might sound quite abstract, but I think has a lot of resonance, or certainly Guadalupe's novel resonated a lot with me when I read it recently. I think the question it's trying to explore is how length matters, the sort of meaning of duration, what it is to kind of enter into a relationship with someone, or with an action and activity such as reading a novel, or indeed writing one, where it should last, it needs to last, or the kind of desire is that it should carry on. So the novel tracks the course of a day, so really it's all set in a day. And the question is ongoingly how to keep going, how to carry on. So it has a kind of interruptive structure, but also a kind of desire for continuity, with all the high stakes that are involved with looking after a newborn. But this can't stop. Helen has initiated, the main character has initiated this life through her pregnancy and giving birth, and it's very important that it not stop. But I was really struck, indeed, reading Stillborn, by this sense of, this promise of this won't last, and how Alina is kind of coming to terms with that, and then being told, oh, it will go on for longer. So the long form is, it's about the meaning of duration, kind of socially and creatively, and I guess also politically. Insofar as it's about forms of living together that last and have this quality of duration. But also, like Susie, I was really interested in trying to write a baby and trying to sort of think about, also wonder about this term motherhood, which I embrace and I claim, but also the way that puts emphasis. The emphasis is so skewed on the sort of adult player in that dynamic. Also, there's a gender designation as well, but I was really interested in collaboration and the fact that there is more than one player in this relationship. So the baby needed to be as kind of fully present and as important as the and as sort of singular and specific as the main adult character. That was really important to me, that it was about this interplay, this interaction. I think that's what makes caring for children or just being around other humans interesting, is the fact that they're singular and specific. They're not kind of generic and anonymous. So that was the ambition, to try and write a very specific presence, a kind of specific force that is a newborn.
I think there's something that could go from here. Susie, please. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think something that all three books have in common is that much of women's days can be spent trying to keep other people alive, and just the sheer responsibility of that, and the everyday being a matter of life and death, just as when you've got a tiny baby, or if you're looking after an elderly parent, and many other things in between. And that's such a hardcore occupation for anyone, and yet it's completely ordinary, almost to the point of sort of banality.
And flattened out to be this singular experience when it's not, as well. And I think, Guadalupe, is there anything you'd like to talk about?
No, not right now.
I mean, I think that idea of there's so many interesting things to talk about right now. I think that the idea of like how it changes the day and sort of forcing you to reevaluate things, I think that, you know, and who is caretaking. With Susie's book, I think that the idea of how it changes people's lives and the timing, I think that in terms of the way that Ruth's life kind of is given this second chance and kind of this opportunity to step back away from this pattern. She's in this circle of friends for whom their lives sort of revolve around their husbands and their families or their single lives. But Ruth gets to drop out of that and find this other way to kind of live and imagine her life. Sort of unique. And I think that, I think that trying to redefine the hours of your days and the way that you spend it, I think is another element of it as well.
I wonder if something we may all have in common is that we're more interested in sort of writing about family relationships rather than love affairs and that romantic relationships. Would you say that's true of you too?
Definitely. And also about time, that's very interesting. I think I've written a book about uncertainty as well, because we just don't know what can happen. We just think that we are going to be pregnant, and after 9 months of pregnancy, the baby will be born, and then we will have a child, a toddler, and then, and then a child, and then an adolescent, and then life is going to be this and this and this. And it's never like that. So I love this fact about uncertainty. And I wrote that novel just before the pandemic, but it was published during the pandemic, and the uncertainty was exactly the point in that moment. We were learning so much about how uncertain life is in reality, and how we are dependent on these projections that we make about our life or how things should be, and it's never like this. So I relate a lot about I can't wait to read the long form, actually.
Thank you.
I want to just say one thing. I think that's really interesting what you have to say about, being far more interested in family life than romantic life. I think your book, Susie, really kind of strips away at kind of the romances that happen in this and looks at a kind of romance with the more cynical lens or a more realistic lens. The true love affairs are the relationships between the family members. And even with Jean in the end of the book with Lily as well. And what struck me so much in your book, Kate, and I'd love for you to talk about it, is the fact that the partner is totally unpresent. And your book is almost 400 pages long, and we never hear who, and I hope I'm not spoiling anything, is we never learn who the partner is, who's Helen's partner. And it's irrelevant, because the relationship that truly matters, that she's chosen herself to prioritize, is this relationship she has with her child and with her friends.
Yeah, I mean, I have one thing to say about the long form, which is perhaps relevant, is it's my first novel. So I was really sort of approaching it as wholly as a novice and as a kind of curious, deeply invested kind of working out, as a process of working out how indeed to do this and what the novel as a form could offer, like what kind of resources it can offer. And I think one of them is a form of paying attention. As a novelist, you're in charge of where you direct the attention and where you center the attention. So I was really interested in sort of paying perhaps sort of excessive attention to materials and sort of aspects of a room, of a living space that might otherwise not be considered kind of worthy of that order of attention. The novel starts with a playmat that becomes a kind of, in Helen's imagination, a kind of a garden to walk around. It makes a path to kind of walk the baby around. It becomes a kind of imaginative, sort of transformable object. But in relation to sort of acts of imagination, I was thinking also about this question of uncertainty and creativity, actually. What forms of creativity have to be kind of provoked, are sort of engendered through the fact that you're not in charge. A refrain that runs through the long form is Helen saying, I decide, I'm the adult. I'm the adult with the adult agency here. I'm in charge. I decide that I'll put you down and you'll sleep now, and is and Rose the baby being like, well, no, I also decide. I'm also part of this, and other things decide. It rains, the weather decides. So I was just really interested in this sort of forms of micro and also sort of very macro, sort of major adjustment that happen when you're dealing with difference and resistance and otherness. And so in these sort of domestic spaces, you get this sort of reckoning with, contending with quite extreme difference, difference between an adult and a newborn, kind of moment to moment. And that feels to me like a kind of work, to cite the title of Olga's book, a really profound and interesting and potentially creative work, because it's causing people to find solutions at the level of, okay, we can't sleep like this, we'll sleep over here, that which might sound like a non-event, but on the scale of the day that the long form narrates, it's actually a major event. So it was important to me to get a creativity, which is perhaps a term that's important across these imagination and creativity, in like social creativity, in terms of how to actually think about how to invent forms of living together that perhaps don't follow existing templates. Or I feel like that's a shared territory as well.
It definitely is a shared character. I mean, I think so much about Guadalupe's book, the way that the neighbor's son and the noise through the wall provokes her engagement with her neighbors, and then and the way that and also the way that the nursery is created, and then it's seen as this kind of painful space where they want to take everything away and get everything away, and then they have to recreate it when the baby survives. And for Susie, in your book, that Ruth is able to kind of make this space and also share a bed with Lily for so long, and her caring for Eleanor, her daughter, and looking after her in her kind of this slum space, the space that she shares with all these other people. And then I feel like towards the end of the book, the way that Lily relates to Jean's apartment and her need to kind of return to her own apartment where she lived with Ruth, that it was her home, how we lay claim to it and how we kind of make those spaces for ourselves. It's totally unconventional. And yeah, I think it also has a lot to do with the structure of the books as well. I mean, I think, if you guys would want to talk about the way that you envisioned your book, did you start out, I guess I'd like to know if all of you kind of intentionally wanted to have the book end up in the form that it ultimately found itself, or if that was something that came through the process of writing. I know Guadalupe's book has this tension between the two characters and it toggles back and forth. And the narrative itself has sort of a very dispassionate tone in order to kind of manage all of the emotion that's happening in that book between the characters. And Kate, yours is kind of part essay, part narrative, and it's very languid. It doesn't, you're not committed to an idea of plot, the traditional plot where things are happening in this fashion and introducing characters in a very steady way. And Susie, yours is perhaps the most conventional, but at the same time, you have so much humor in this book that's full of pathos, and so many characters who unexpectedly rise up in different roles in each other's lives. I wonder if you could talk about that a bit as well. I know that's a lot. I'm sorry.
As ever with me, I try and start with tone, and I knew nearly all my books, probably like your two books as well, on this occasion, are about sort of how we bear the things that we can't bear. And I was sort of directly inspired. The Christmas, I'm a complete Christmas freak. I love Christmas and I start looking forward to it in about February. But the Christmas after my mother died, I just thought I can't have Christmas without her. It was just sort of too awful. So we all rather eccentrically went to Miami, and on Christmas Eve we went to see La La Land, which had just come out. And afterwards we passed this building, which I thought was a toy shop because it had massive red and gold parcels outside, but it was actually a church, and it had a big banner proclaiming radical empathy and extreme sympathy. on offer. So I thought that's exactly what I need. And we went in, and the church was particularly designed to welcome people who had mental health problems and problems with addiction. And a lot of people in the congregation were completely out of it, sort of nodding in and out from drugs, or sort of swaying from alcohol, or having other kinds of difficulties. And then when the sermon came, it was completely about grief. And in front of us were three little girls in red flamenco dresses, sisters in descending sizes, next to a bank of candles, so looking like they might go up in flames any minute. And the whole thing was such a mixture of tremendous fellow feeling and alarm somehow. And that kind of inspired the christening scene in the book, where the parents of the baby who are on drugs are kind of trying to be a bit festive and jolly, but are really, really not managing. And that tone of something that was a sort of dark scene that also had high spirits in it was something that I wanted for the whole book. So it sort of came from there.
So in my case, no, I wasn't planning in the beginning to write a novel. I thought I was going to write a long short story, which is contradictory in a way, but short stories are my major genre, actually, and I've published more short stories collections than novels. But after, I don't know, 25 pages, I realized that it couldn't end there, that I had to go to a longer form. And then I thought I was going to write a short novel, about 100 pages maximum. And then I couldn't stop there either, because other things happened into my friend's life and so on. So I had to write the second part. And now I'm wondering if I shouldn't have written the third part of it. You know, so it wasn't planned at all like that. And many other things, like the pigeons in the book, or the big protest of women in the streets, that was happening actually in the actual world, in my country, and in my home where I was living. The pigeons were actually there in my window. So these elements enter into the novel, and it was quite strange, I have to say.
What was the third element you wish you could have brought to the book? And I mean, if you want to talk about that at all.
Well, the baby's still alive. She's like 6 years old now, and she's going to school, and she's having a relationship, her own relationship with other children. And I think what she's doing to these other children is wonderful, because they're getting familiar with someone who has a condition like hers, which is enormous from my point of view, because we are not used to that. And I think that in this next generation, people like Ines will be accepted more naturally, or at least that's what I hope.
I agree.
So I could have brought that to the book.
At which stage in the book did you ask your friend for permission to write about her life? Was it very early on, or was it something that made you anxious?
Very, very early. Actually, I wanted her to participate in a way into the writing. She doesn't write at all, and she's very, very shy. She doesn't like to be exposed, but if she accepted it is because she wanted to give visibility to these matters and the families, the process of these families like hers. So we wrote the beginning together, and I interviewed her since the beginning to write the novel.
I mean, I really felt as a reader it could have been longer. I would have wanted it to. I want it to be longer. If there's a sense of wanting to stay, to keep more company with Ines and to understand further. So, I mean, for me, in terms of like the genesis of it, it partly links to my translation work. So I translated a lecture course called How to Live Together, which was sort of generative for this book, or the questions there were generative for this book, as was another lecture course called The Preparation of the Novel and what a novel is, and why you might, what as I said earlier, the kinds of what's specific to the novel as a time-based art form. But I was also very interested in precedents and thinking about the kind of origins of the novel in English, and one precedent, Helen in the long form, she reads a novel gets delivered at her flat. She's a reader. She's not a writer, or or an academic, but she's a reader, and she's a reader. And this novel is Tom Jones by Henry Fielding, and which kind of declares itself as being one of the first novels in the English language. And Fielding sort of semi-seriously claims to be inventing a whole new province of writing. And I was really interested in this idea of a kind of province, a kind of territory of writing. And also very interested in the fact that Tom Jones is made up of essay parts and fiction parts. So I was intrigued by the fact that this kind of inaugural moment, or one of the beginnings, or declared beginnings of the English language novel, should have this sort of these two different materials happening alongside each other. And I guess it's part of, so the long form sort of reactivates that form in having fictional parts and also these essayistic, more discursive parts, as part of kind of thinking about territory and form and templates that we inherit, that we receive, like looking after children, that might appear kind of exhausted and already dealt with. Perhaps this idea of the novel being a form that's already kind of pushed itself to, achieved its kind of most supreme accomplishment or something in the 19th century, and now we're just in a degraded version of it, or this kind of discourse that you get around the novel, which I think you can also very recently get around books like ours, of just sort of dealing with these forms of relationships with newcomers, with the newest humans. This idea that it's kind of exhausted territory and it's all already been said. And I think that's always that interests me, is this idea of, well, if this is already very old, where does newness come in? I think it links to being a translator, actually, this idea of a practice which is considered to be not about introducing newness, typically, more about kind of reproduction or reiteration. And I guess I'm very interested in the forms of creativity and newness that can be engendered through going into existing territory, and sort of dealing with precedents and what's come before. So yeah, that was there was a kind of structure, a sort of tutor structure that offered itself to me through the kind of model of Tom Jones, which also deals with a baby. A baby is found in a bed, a kind of foundling, and it's also a kind of unlikely fathering that happens through that process of kind of encountering a child and having to develop a relationship with a child. And I was also very interested in that, in this sort of apparently sort of non-biologically bonded relation that gets going. If you know the plot of Tom Jones, you know how that plays out, but I won't, spoil that. It's a very long book, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Susie, did you want to add something? You look like you're poised to say something.
I was just going to say I'm only about a fifth of the way through the long form, which I'm really enjoying, but I sometimes have a sense of a very kind of impassioned and precise and intelligent literary critic looking upon a baby and babyhood itself as a sort of text. And I like that, the sort of excitement of that on the page very much, that if I don't know if you guys did literature degrees, which I did, but that sense that being taught to read so that you see the absolute maximum that any text could possibly offer up changes how you live, because then you do that just as you walk down a street, or you're moved to tears by the polka dots on someone's socks, or the texture of everything is so sort of extra. And I felt that kind of enthusiasm for enthusiasms that my favorite literary critics have in the way that the baby is sort of addressed in what I've read so far. And I thought that worked really, really well.
Well, thank you for reading, Susie. But I think also what you describe must relate to what you said at the beginning about a form of wonderment or looking afresh at what might be a very familiar environment in the way that a child might, or so I feel like my video might have gone a bit strange there, but did you get my point, Susie? Just that this sort of looking anew, like looking to like what it might it be for a baby to gaze at a wall, for example, and see that afresh, and that kind of wonderment that you mentioned right at the beginning.
And
sort of try, how do you write from that place? That might be a place to write from, to start writing from.
And of course, very interestingly, this thing called Baby Dearest is the fact that almost very, 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 very few babies can write, can they? So we don't know what they think with that kind of precision, and how I mean, the whole mystery of how babies think and feel and experience the world is part of the wonder, isn't it? If you're trying to think seriously about them.
Yeah, and they're absent of literature. Actually, they're not represented enough. Try to think which novels do you know where babies are real characters?
Hardly any.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to the question of who and what is considered kind of interesting. You know, whose experience is considered interesting and valuable and sort of actually impactful on the world. And I think there is the kind of the novel tends to think of, well, adults and also able adults, you know, because babies are not necessarily involved, or the very ill, or the very, you know, the very vulnerable, otherwise vulnerable, or perhaps you don't have access to language, or, you know, what are the it would be very interesting to do a statistical analysis, I think, of the sort of the kinds of, there are children in novels, but they tend to be children that have reached a certain age of articulacy and agency. So I really appreciate these big books written about the, you know, agents, protagonists who are perhaps typically considered, or are not considered, but are actively denied agency in the world.
Well, or who are precocious to the point of being young adults instead. I think there's that too. And I think going back to as well to think about the ways that motherhood is sort of portrayed and kind of where the discourse is, we talked about it a little bit before, is like this idea of like the monstrous nature of children, and how it can be disruptive to creative lives, instead of seeing it as like a fruitful place for people to reimagine themselves and kind of give themselves an opportunity to kind of to not feel that they've reached a point where there are no other options, that they can kind of reimagine this space and find and then use it as a space, going back to what you were saying, Susie, is like this space of empathy, and that kind of idea. When you can't communicate with someone, how do you communicate with them? Like what do we have to draw upon to kind of establish that relationship from the jump, right? And it is about empathy, and it is about like being present for someone who cannot speak to you, and reading between the lines and looking beyond a script to kind of create a relationship.
And creativity is a really vital key in spending a lot of time with a baby. If you want to make it special and meaningful, and create memorable occasions and things just for yourself, and keep yourself going, you do have to play a lot of imaginative games, tell a lot of stories, make a lot of apple puree for dolls who can't swallow, or whatever it takes, the getting of the one side of the day to the other, and trying to recapture what play might mean when you're an adult, and that kind of thing are kind of a big part of it. And before I had a child myself, I was very nervous that whenever I'd ever read a story to a child, they'd always stopped me before the end. So I had this idea that I was a really terrible storyteller to children, and I I remember the first time I told one of my children a story and it sort of worked and we got to the end. I couldn't believe it because I just assumed that I didn't have the knack or whatever, but I just must have had very fussy listeners in the first instance or whatever. But it's funny that things that you worry about or just how a tiny thing can throw you off and think I'm not built for this, or I haven't quite got the right apparatus, or where's the instructions, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, the patience that you need to draw upon to be able to make space for mistakes and trying different things. I think it also, getting back to this idea of the structure of the novel, kind of helps you reimagine the novel and find different ways to tell stories that seem that they've been told before. Just thinking about Guadalupe's book too, and kind of and how those people had to kind of suspend their expectation and draw back, and even, you know, the idea of not wanting to have children and understand, trying to come to terms with what it means to care for others when you can, you know, your life is interrupted, and those interruptions as well. And I think your books manage that as well too, is like the interruptions of the characters. Nothing feels that they don't feel as though they're betraying themselves, and then they're able to have the space to be kind of complete characters, where instead of just committing themselves to one notion of what they expect of themselves. And I think that's what I want most from a book, is to see change and development from the characters, because I want that for myself.
Yeah, empathy is a very interesting thing and very important for me, of course. And I was I was wondering how I could manage to awake it in readers without becoming melodramatic, because of this kind of story I wanted to write about. So it was very, very difficult to find, you know, a balance between the very, very tragic story and not manipulating the reader. So for me, you know, Mending the Living, this novel by French author Maïlys de Kerangal, was definitely an inspiration, because she writes with a huge distance on a very, very dramatic plot. And that was very important for me. And I think without that reading, I wouldn't have been able to do what I did. I mean, that was really important.
I think that with your two characters having, certainly at the beginning, such entirely different worldviews, and that doesn't stop them being friends. I find that so moving, just from very early on, that one wants what the other so doesn't want, and you just sort of think, I don't know. I love the way that difference is accommodated, and it's just so well done.
Thank you.
You know, New York Magazine just had this huge piece that created all this disruption about, and I don't know if any of you saw it, about how disruptive children are to friendship. And it was written by someone who does not have children. And I just thought, what a lack of imagination that you are willing to not to, you know, feel so injured by and someone else's disruption in their life, and not want to make space and not see this as an opportunity to see something different in yourself, and also have this other relationship to children. You know, I mean, maybe that's really naive on my part, but I just think even in your late 30s, or at some point, you know, you can get tired of the same kind of situations and scenarios. It's kind of fun to try to see yourself at play and step down and just take time with someone who isn't like you and doesn't have your preoccupations and worry about work. Kind of see past it and use that as a space to reimagine what it is to be a person, and what relationships are meant to be.
I do think it's complex. I mean, I haven't read that piece actually, Lauren, so I can't speak to it. But I do think it is intensely complex, though, as well. Like what it is to just observe someone else giving so much of someone who might normally attention, sort of directing their attention towards another being, like what it is to sort of reckon with that sort of redistribution of attention, and how to. I mean, there is a friendship in the long form. Helen has which is also it's kind of complicated. I think it just with that sort of disruption or interruption again, it's that opportunity for sort of creativity and reimagining of like, well, how do I resituate myself in relation to this dynamic? Is it possible to re-find a ground that we can share? And I think it's that sort of. I think that's what life is. And that's what life is like, is that kind of regular resituating, adjusting, responding to things that we can't necessarily control. And the reason why I think studying time with the very, very vulnerable, is because it sort of writes that so large. It makes that so kind of intensive and kind of in such things that we're all doing all the time. It's, reckoning with differences of worldview, as Susie says, reckoning with differences across age, in the way that in Guadalupe's novel, there's that beautiful unfolding dynamic between the protagonist and the young boy, the neighbor, like just this sort of, how do we resituate ourselves constantly? But there's something very intensive that happens, I think, when you are almost constantly without a break with a newborn. It's not that it's sort of in my view, it's not that it's sort of fundamentally different. It's not. It's just it's sort of the volume is turned up on something that we're all doing all the time. That's why it's interesting. I think that's why it's interesting to those to people who've undergone it or been the baby in that scenario, but not the parent carer, who are thinking of doing it or would never do it for all kinds of affective or social or political reasons or whatever. But it's still kind of interesting. Yeah.
Something we haven't touched on so much is how having a baby or a child makes you revisit your own childhood and babyhood, and that's very much a theme in Loved and Missed, that right at the end of the book, where she's sort of examining what she might have gone wrong, which she hardly can bear to do because it's sort of unspeakable, and that's a whole other book that hovers over this book. She says that she thinks there was something about loving her own child that provoked fury in the part of her that had gone unloved herself, and that sort of that if you've had shaky beginnings and early life adversity, as she had, furnishing another creature with sort of what you perceive to be sort of loveliness and kindness and care is going to hurt as well. However much it's a sign of recovery and success, it's also slightly going to break your heart, and that can be a big concern.
There's so much at play, and there's so much that one has to take on in these kind of relationships, and it is a lot. And I mean, I try to have empathy for the child-free woman who wrote that article, because I mean, I think that we all come from at different points, and the beauty is that we can all change our minds, and we can be affected and shifted by all these relationships.
I'm feeling she could have texted her best friend saying, "I sure would love to see you. What are you doing at the weekend?" or something like that. But maybe she's right.
And then for lots of different reasons, I think people don't. We could talk endlessly about this. I know. And I would love to keep talking with all of you. I think that your novels all share this kind of incredible capacity to create space and to provoke conversations about what's possible, and whether or not one is come up in a challenging, difficult situation or not, and how to be able to adjust constantly. So if anybody has any final thoughts, I'd love to draw that together. I know we have to close this in a moment, but if there's any last thing anyone would like to make sure we say, please step in.
I was just rapidly putting in a power cable there, but I'd just like to say how grateful I am for to be part of this conversation, but also to be part of a constellation of books, of works that are contending with these questions in different registers and modes and in different ways. It feels to me like a wholly inexhaustible territory of thinking and experience, because it's a human experience, and therefore inexhaustible. And to be part of a kind of growing body of work that's dealing, making the presence of a character such as Inez, or a complex baby, as you were saying, Susie, who's kind of fully in the world, then it feels like a very exciting time to be writing and thinking.
Yes, and I'd also like to say I feel that the idea of unconditional love has sort of almost become a commonplace that's flows through the taps in every house, whereas I think it's actually a really exceptional, unusual thing, and that it's that it might be unrequited love might be more common, or I sort of feel that it exists sometimes, but the idea that it's just a kind of low level thing that exists everywhere is I'm really surprised that that's a sort of currency of our time somehow, and that the expectations of that how someone behaves won't expect how alter how you feel about them. Or interestingly, Freud said it only existed between mothers and infant sons, which is strange, but so that's another aspect of all this, that the expectation of unconditional love being absolutely the norm, which I don't think it can be.
Perhaps it's the ideal. I don't know. I mean, or what we aspire to, right? And if we meet it, then that's great. And I hope that, and what we try to bring to everything is that sort of sense of forgiveness. Guadalupe, do you have something to? Guadalupe, do you have something to add?
I was thinking about. I agree with her. We have to think. Agree with her. We have to think about and how to act as family. We have to reinvent it. I would like also men to think about it, not just us, but I'm so happy that there are so many people thinking about that right now.
Definitely. I need to wrap this up. Sadly, I feel like we could just continue on, and it's a shame, we can keep going with this, but I want to thank all of you, Kay, Guadalupe, and Susie, for being a part of this conversation. Your books are so tremendous. I hope that everyone will go out and order them and read them right now. Please, you can, and on that note, you can order them in the link below. And please consider, viewers, making a donation to the Brooklyn Book Festival, which is celebrating its 18th year of presenting free literary programming. It's the most exceptional festival in that all of this is free, but we do it upon the grace of your, goodwill. And please remember that if you are in New York City next weekend, October 1st, the in-person festival will be in downtown Brooklyn, and we hope to see you there. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.